The game had that familiar feeling early on, that sense that Golden State had found a rhythm, dictating the pace, pushing the tempo, moving the ball, and feeding off energy on both ends of the floor. For long stretches, it looked like one of those nights where the Warriors' experience and confidence would carry them through, especially with the way they responded to every run. Even when the momentum swung, they kept answering, refusing to let the game slip away. By the time regulation ended, it felt like they had done enough to earn control, but overtime told a different story, and that is where fatigue finally crept in and showed its face. Running out of gas that late is never easy to watch, especially for a team that still believes it has championship DNA. Normally, that kind of ending would spark frustration and questions about whether this roster can survive the grind of elite competition. But sometimes the context matters more than the result, and this was one of those nights where the numbers on the stat sheet explain almost everything. When a single player delivers a performance that borders on historic, there are moments when all you can do is acknowledge it and move forward. That was exactly the case here. Scottie Barnes put together one of those games that lives in highlights and box scores long after the final buzzer. He controlled every area of the floor, scoring, rebounding, and creating plays with an authority that was impossible to ignore. He finished with 23 points, pulled down 25 rebounds, and handed out 10 assists, turning the game into his personal showcase. There are defensive adjustments you can make, schemes you can try, bodies you can throw at him, but when a player is seeing the game that clearly and imposing himself that completely, resistance only goes so far. It was not just Barnes either. Toronto had multiple players stepping up and finding their scoring touch, with consistent pressure throughout the night. That balance made it even harder for Golden State to load up on one option or take a calculated risk defensively. When three different players are living in the 20s offensively, the margin for error shrinks fast, especially in a game that extends beyond regulation. At that point, it becomes less about what you did wrong and more about recognizing that the opponent simply delivered at a higher level in the biggest moments. From the Warriors' perspective, there were still positives to take away, even in a loss. Draymond Green provided meaningful scoring, attacking when the opportunity was there and not hesitating to assert himself. Jimmy Butler hovered just under the 20-point mark and brought his usual edge and physicality. Stephen Curry once again carried an enormous workload, flirting with 40 points and shouldering the offensive responsibility for long stretches. The concern, though, comes from how heavy that burden was. Curry logged 41 minutes, essentially being asked to carry the engine from tip-off through overtime, and that kind of usage always raises questions about sustainability. Depth was clearly a factor in this one. With multiple rotation players unavailable, the Warriors were forced to lean on smaller lineups and extended minutes from the core guards. Outside of Al Horford, the bench leaned heavily toward perimeter players, which limited flexibility and physical presence, especially late in the game. Even so, they managed to stay competitive through 4 quarters, matching intensity and execution until overtime exposed the fatigue. It is frustrating, no doubt, but it also speaks to the resilience of a group that refused to fold despite the circumstances. The bigger conversation, though, continues to swirl around what comes next for this roster, especially with trade rumors refusing to die down. Ever since the matchup against Dallas last week, speculation has picked up again, particularly around Anthony Davis and whether he could somehow end up in Golden State. On the surface, it sounds dramatic and headline-worthy, but when you dig into the reality, the idea quickly loses its appeal. Davis left that game early after only 11 minutes, and availability has been the defining question of his season. So far, he has appeared in roughly 15 games, and that matters. Talent is not the issue. When healthy, Davis is a dominant force, a true two-way big who can anchor a defense and score at all 3 levels. But potential only counts if it translates into consistent time on the floor. For a team already navigating tight margins and depth concerns, tying major assets to a player who struggles to stay healthy is a massive gamble. A big body only helps if it is actually present, and otherwise it becomes a costly limitation. There is also the financial side of it. The league has changed, and teams are now far more cautious under the hard cap, especially with the second apron forcing front offices to rethink the value of depth versus star power. The era of endlessly paying premiums for name recognition is fading, and contracts are being scrutinized more than ever. Adding an expensive veteran who may seek further guarantees does not align with that shift, particularly for a team trying to remain flexible while competing. When you look around the league, it becomes clear that Golden State is not the most logical destination in these discussions. Other teams, like Chicago, make more sense structurally and financially if they choose to take a swing. For the Warriors, the cost would be enormous, requiring multiple rotation players and future assets just to make the numbers work. Giving up that much for someone who has not been consistently available simply does not add up, no matter how tempting the name might sound on paper. As frustrating as the loss was, it ultimately feels like one of those games that you file away and learn from rather than dwell on. The Warriors battled, adjusted, and stayed in it against a team that had a player deliver a night for the ages. That happens in this league. The focus now shifts quickly because another game is right around the corner, and the opportunity to respond is immediate. As the schedule keeps moving forward, the conversation around Golden State naturally shifts from what just happened to what this team still needs to become more consistent. Losses like the one against Toronto have a way of exposing both strengths and weaknesses at the same time. The competitiveness is there, the fight is there, but the margins remain thin, especially when the rotation tightens and the workload on the stars becomes heavier than ideal. Over the past few weeks, that pattern has shown up more than once, and it is hard to ignore how often Stephen Curry is being asked to carry an enormous share of the responsibility. There's a fine line between trusting your best player and overextending him, and that line becomes even more delicate as the season progresses. Curry continues to deliver at an elite level, creating offense seemingly out of nothing and keeping Golden State within striking distance night after night. But when he is pushing past 40 minutes in competitive games, the long-term implications come into focus. Championship teams usually find ways to protect their stars, not just for one night, but for the months that follow. That is why the discussion around depth and rotation balance feels more urgent than ever. The absence of key frontcourt pieces has forced the coaching staff into smaller lineups. And while those groups can be effective in short bursts, they're not always built to survive the physical demands of overtime basketball. The lack of size becomes especially noticeable on the glass and in late-game defensive possessions, where one extra rebound or one missed rotation can swing the outcome. Even so, the Warriors deserve credit for staying competitive through regulation, refusing to let the game get away from them despite being shorthanded. This is also where the patience of the fan base gets tested. Every loss sparks another wave of speculation, another round of trade machine scenarios, and another attempt to identify a quick fix. The reality, though, is rarely that simple. Adding a big name does not automatically solve structural issues, especially when that addition comes with durability questions and significant financial implications. That is why the persistent Anthony Davis chatter feels disconnected from what Golden State actually needs right now. The league's economic landscape has shifted dramatically, and the second apron has changed the way contenders approach roster construction. Depth has become more valuable than ever, and flexibility is no longer a luxury. It is a necessity. Teams are increasingly wary of tying up massive portions of their cap in players who cannot consistently stay on the floor. In that context, the idea of sacrificing multiple rotation players and future assets for an injury-prone star feels like a step backward rather than a bold leap forward. If Golden State is going to explore upgrades, they are far more likely to come in the form of reliable, durable big men who can contribute without disrupting the entire roster ecosystem. Players who understand their role, protect the rim, rebound, and allow the perimeter stars to conserve energy are often far more valuable than headline-grabbing acquisitions. The front office has historically succeeded when it identified those kinds of fits rather than chasing names that dominate social media conversations. There's also the psychological side of the locker room to consider. Continuity matters, especially for a team that has built its identity around chemistry and shared experience. Constantly floating the idea of major shakeups can create noise that distracts from the work that needs to be done on the floor. The Warriors are at their best when roles are clearly defined and trust is established, not when everyone is looking over their shoulder wondering what might change next. As the season inches closer to the midway point, the urgency will naturally increase, but that does not mean panic should set in. The Western Conference remains crowded, and momentum can swing quickly with a few strong performances. Golden State has already shown that it can compete with high-level teams, even when circumstances are less than ideal. The challenge now is finding consistency, especially in closing moments and extended games where depth and stamina become decisive factors. Looking ahead to the immediate future, the matchup against Brooklyn presents an opportunity to reset the narrative. The Nets are in a different phase, clearly prioritizing flexibility and future assets, but that does not mean they will simply roll over. Young teams often play loose and aggressive, especially when there is little external pressure, and that can make them dangerous if underestimated. For the Warriors, this game is less about the opponent and more about execution, focus, and energy. Responding the right way after a tough loss has always been a hallmark of strong teams. It is about tightening the details, managing minutes more effectively, and ensuring that the effort level does not dip just because the opponent's record suggests a favorable matchup. Games like this can easily turn into traps if intensity is not matched from the opening tip. Golden State knows that lesson well from past seasons, and this will be another test of maturity and discipline. There is still a sense that this team is searching for its true identity, especially with lineups constantly shifting due to injuries and availability. That process takes time, and it rarely unfolds in a straight line. Some nights bring encouraging signs, while others expose areas that still need work. The key is not overreacting to either extreme, but instead building towards something sustainable. For all the noise surrounding trades and rumors, the most important work remains internal. Improving communication on defense, securing rebounds, limiting turnovers, and finding ways to generate offense without leaning entirely on Curry are all areas that can be addressed without a single transaction. Those incremental gains often make the difference between a team that hovers around contention and one that truly threatens in the postseason. As the Warriors prepare to take the floor again, the focus naturally shifts away from speculation and back to basketball. The loss to Toronto stung, but it also provided clarity. It showed what happens when fatigue meets elite individual brilliance, and it reinforced how small the margins can be in this league. The response in the next game will say a lot about where this team stands mentally and physically as the grind of the season continues. Before we continue, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any exclusive Dubs updates. Let's keep going. A shockwave is quietly rippling through NBA circles, and it centers on a name that few expected to be linked so closely with the Golden State Warriors. According to growing league chatter, the Warriors have reached an agreement to bring Zach LaVine into their orbit in what could become one of the most intriguing moves of the season if confirmed. While nothing has been officially announced, the rumor is gaining traction among executives, agents, and insiders who believe the deal is more advanced than many realize. What makes this potential move so compelling is not just LaVine's scoring pedigree, but the specific factor that reportedly tipped the scales in Golden State's favor. Sources close to the situation suggest that the Warriors sold LaVine on a clearly defined role within their offensive structure, one that would allow him to thrive without carrying the entire burden of creation. The promise of playing in a motion-heavy system, surrounded by elite shooters and high IQ passers, is said to have resonated deeply with the guard, who has often faced defensive overloads elsewhere. There is also speculation that the Warriors emphasized longevity and reinvention. Rather than viewing LaVine solely as a volume scorer, the pitch reportedly focused on efficiency, spacing, and selective explosiveness, a way to extend his prime and reshape his narrative in the league. Being part of an established winning culture, with championship expectations and veteran leadership, may have been the subtle but decisive argument. Financial details remain murky, and rival teams are still monitoring the situation closely. Some believe Golden State leveraged flexibility and creativity rather than pure numbers, presenting a vision of competitiveness and relevance that few franchises can credibly offer. Others whisper that LaVine sees this as an opportunity to redefine himself on the biggest possible stage, where every performance is amplified. For now, the league waits. If the rumor proves accurate, this would not just be another roster move, but a statement. One that signals the Warriors' refusal to fade quietly and LaVine's desire to chase something bigger than individual accolades. Until confirmation arrives, the speculation will only grow louder. Stay updated exclusively with the latest Dub Nation news. Subscribe to our channel and hit the like button to keep getting daily updates on the Warriors. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Your input is essential for the Dubs community. Stay tuned for the next video.